All right, Mr. Trutna here. We're going to be going over worksheet 7.6b. We're going to be using the distance formula. This is Math 1, Clovis High School. So what you can see is the numbers 1 through 6, we're given a segment, and so what would you want it to do, and I've already preloaded some of these problems is that you want to figure out where the coordinates of the endpoints of the segment are right here, and then we're going to use the distance formula in order to find the distance between the pair of points. Okay, so remember, when we're looking at these points right here, what we're going to do is above each point we're going to denote which number is my first x, which number is my second x, which number is my first y, and which number is my second y. So I'm going to call this -5 my first x, so I'm going to put an x1 there. I'm going to call this 1 my second x, so I'm going to put x2 there. That 5 would be my first y, and that -2 is going to be my second y. Okay, so it's always a good idea to write above the points, the coordinates, which values are going to be x1, y1, x2, and y2. Okay, so once I do that, then I'm going to plug them into my formula. All right, I'm going to get a really long square root. I'm going to have a parentheses. x2 is 1 minus x1 is -5. So I'm going to get 1 minus a -5. Then I'm going to have that parentheses to the second power. Then I put an addition symbol. Then I start a new parentheses. Then I take my y2 value, which is -2. Then I subtract from it minus my y1 value, which is 5. I close the parentheses to the second power. Okay, so your first line is always write down the formula. Your second line is plug in the value, substitute in the values of your x's and your y's that you denoted from your ordered pair. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to work out the parentheses first. I'm going to shorten each one of the parentheses. So I'm going to have a square root, and then I'm going to still have a parentheses, but 1 minus -5, really that just means 1 plus 5, so that's going to be 6 to the second power, plus -2 minus 5 is going to give me -7 to the second power. Okay, so then my next step is going to be I'm going to square each amount. So I'm going to take 6 and I'm going to raise it to the second power. So that's 36, and I can drop the parentheses. Plus -7 to the second power is 49. Okay, and then my next step is I'm going to add these two up. 36 plus 49 is 85, and then to get my final answer I take the square root of 85. Alright, so the square root of 85 is this really long decimal, and notice that the instructions say round to the nearest tenth if necessary. So I get 9.2 is in the tenth spot. The 1's going to leave it, so my official answer for number 1, the distance between the points, is going to be 9.2. Alrighty, number 2 right here. So I have my coordinate points here. I have -5, 1. I have 4, 0. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to denote the -5 as my first x with x1. That would make the 4 my second x as x2. So then the 1 is my y1, and then the 0 is my y2. Okay, so then once I denote my values, I'm going to plug them into my distance formula. Alright, so I'm going to have parentheses. x2 is 4 minus x1 is -5. So I get a 4 minus a -5. Remember, it's always a minus symbol, and then it's the number afterwards, whatever x1 is, squared. Plus, then I do the next parentheses, y2, which is 0, minus y1, which is 1, close the parentheses, squared. Alright, now I work out the inside of the parentheses. So I'm still going to have a parentheses, but I'm going to shorten them. So 4 minus -5, that's a plus right there, so that becomes 9 squared. Plus 0 minus 1 is -1 squared. Okay, now I'm going to work out the second power, the exponents. 9 squared is 81, plus -1 squared is 1. I add those up, and I get the square root of 82. Okay, and now I use my calculator to figure out what is the square root of 82. So the square root of 82 is 9.055 and a bunch of numbers after that. So I'm going to round to the 10th. So the 0 is in the 10th spot. So, but the 5 after the 0 rounds me up to 9.1. So in number 2, my distance is going to be 9.1. All right, moving on to number 3. So I have the endpoint -2, 4 as an ordered pair, and I have the other endpoint as 0, 3 as an ordered pair. Okay, so I'm going to write down my distance formula. Remember, you always want to start off by writing down the distance formula. That way, you just have a better chance of remembering it. And knowing the formula is obviously going to be more beneficial for your grade than not knowing the formula. All right, so now I'm going to denote which number is my first x. That's going to be my -2. Then my second x is going to be 0. That makes my first y as +4 and my second y as +3. Now, as we talked about in class, if you make x1, y1, 0 and 3, and x2 and y2, -2 and 4, it's not going to change your answer at all, okay, in the very end. It'll change the way your problem looks, but it won't change your final solution. Okay, so once I denote what my values, I'm going to plug them in, substitute them in. So x2 is 0. I always put a subtraction symbol. x1 is -2. So I'm going to get 0 minus -2. Close the parentheses to the second power. Plus, start a new parentheses. y2 is 3. Minus, y1 is 4. Close the parentheses to the second power. So I substitute in the values. Now I work it out. I'm following my order of operations to work this problem out, to evaluate it. So I do the parentheses first. So 0 minus -2, a double negative makes that 0 plus 2. So I'm going to get 2 squared plus 3 minus 4 is -1. So I'm going to get -1 squared here. Now I'm going to square both of the numbers. So I have a square root. My square root's getting a little bit shorter each time because I'm simplifying the inside of the square root. 2 squared is 4 plus -1 squared is +1. Add those two numbers up and I get the square root of 5. And then I use my calculator to find out what the square root of 5 is. So the square root of 5 is 2.2360 and a bunch of numbers after that. So once again, I'm going to round to the 10th. So 2 is in the 10th spot, that 2 right there. The 3 would not round it up, so 2.2 is my sufficient answer for number 3. So the distance between the endpoints of number 3 is going to be 2.2. All right. Okay, same idea with number 4. We have a vertical line here, so I'm going to plug those numbers into the distance formula. This -4 I'm going to denote as x1, which means that -4 is going to be my x2, which means the 2 would be my y1, my first y, and that -4 is going to be my second y. Okay, it's always a good idea to denote which values are going to be your x2 and your x1 and y2 and y1. That way you just don't get confused when you substitute them in. Okay, so substituting it in, x2 is -4. Then I put a minus sign. x1 is also -4. So I'm going to get a -4 minus -4. Close the parentheses to the second power. Plus, start a new parentheses. y2 is -4. Minus y1 is 2. Then I close the parentheses to the second power. Okay, so now I follow my order of operations to evaluate this mathematical expression. All right, so the first parentheses, I've got a double negative again, so that makes it positive, and -4 plus 4 is 0. So I'm going to get a 0 in parentheses to the second power, plus -4 minus 2 is -6. So I'm going to get a -6 to the second power. Now I evaluate it using the exponents. So 0 to the second power is 0, plus -6 to the second power is 36. Add those values up, I get the square root of 36, and then I take the square root of that, and I don't need a calculator because that turns out to be a nice whole number. So my answer to number 4 is going to be 6. Okay, number 5. So here's my distance formula. Once again, always start off the problem by writing your distance formula. And then I'm going to go through my points right here, and I'm going to denote which one is my first x. So I'm going to call x -5 my first x. That would mean the -1 is my second x. That would mean the -4 is my first y, and the -4 over here is my second y. Okay, and then I'm going to substitute those values into my distance formula. So substituting it in, I'm going to get the square root, and then I'm going to have a parentheses, x2, which is -1, minus x1, which is -5. So I'm going to get a -1 minus -5, close the parentheses to the second power, plus, start a new parentheses, y2, I substitute -4, put a subtraction symbol or minus, y1, I substitute -4. So I get minus a -4, I close the parentheses to the second power. Okay? Alright, so after I substitute the numbers in, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to evaluate the inside of the parentheses. Always work out parentheses first. So, -1 minus -5, here we have this double negative again, so that means plus, +5, so that's 4. So I'm going to have 4 to the second power from my first parentheses. I put a plus symbol, and then -4 minus -4, I have a double negative again, so that becomes plus, so this becomes 0 to the second power. Now I square each one of those numbers to simplify it. Alright, so 4 squared is 16, plus 0 squared is 0. I add those numbers up, I get the square root of 16, I take the square root of 16, don't need a calculator for it because it's a whole number. So in number 5, the distance between the 2 points is going to be 4. Alright, last one, number 6. So on number 6, we have, we write down our distance formula, and then I have my coordinates here. One endpoint is -2, 0. My other endpoint is 3, -5. So I'm going to just to show you, I'm just going to mix it up a little bit. So in this problem, I'm going to call 3x1. Okay, so that would make the -2 my x2, which would make the -5 my y1, which would make the 0 my y2. Okay, like I said earlier in one of the earlier problems, it doesn't matter which one is x1 and y1 and which one is x2 and y2. You're going to get the same answer when you substitute it into your formula. Putting these numbers into my formula, I get x2, which is -2, minus x1, which is 3. Close the parentheses to the second power. Plus, start a new parentheses, y2, which is 0, minus y1, which is -5. Close the parentheses to the second power. Now I evaluate, I use my order of operations, work out the inside of the parentheses first. -2 minus 3 is -5, so I get -5 to the second power, plus, and here I have 0 minus -5, so I have my double negative, which makes it plus. So then this parentheses becomes 5 to the second power. Now I'm going to do the exponents, evaluate using the exponents. -5 to the second power is 25, plus 5 to the second power is 25. Add those up, I get the square root of 50. And then I use my calculator. 50 is not going to have a nice, perfect, friendly square root. It's not a perfect square number. So you can see that the square root of 50 is a rather lengthy decimal. So I'm going to round my answer to the 10th. So I'm going to have a 7 point, and then I have a 0. But the 7 after that 0 is going to round that to a 1. So my acceptable solution to number 6 would be 7.1. Okay, so those are the first 6 problems. There's 10 problems to do on the back. But in class next time we'll check them.